At 03:47 hours, Vega Prime Standard Time, space itself split open. 300 alien warships erupted from faster-than-light travel in perfect synchronization, and every sensor array on the planet overloaded at the same instant. Warning sirens screamed across cities, military bases, and orbital stations. But they screamed for only 11 seconds. 11 seconds was all the 2 million human colonists were given before the heavens transformed into a sea of burning copper. The invasion fleet hung motionless above the world like an executioner's blade. Each vessel was a colossal wedge of obsidian black metal, stretching for kilometers, its surface so dark it seemed to swallow the surrounding starlight. They stood in flawless geometric formation, so perfectly aligned that the fleet resembled a mathematical equation carved into the fabric of space. Every warship bore 41 deep battle scars etched into its armored hull, a silent record of 41 civilizations that had stood against them and lost, one for every civilization the Kethan Empire had conquered. When their formation held position over Vega Prime, it blotted out the star entirely. The colony's northern continent fell into false night. Supreme Warlord Voxar had done this 41 times before. 41 worlds, 41 civilizations. Each one had submitted within 72 hours. Most had submitted within 24. The Helvari, a species of extraordinary intelligence and zero military aggression, had transmitted a full planetary surrender in 43 minutes, still weeping during the broadcast. Voxar had been mildly disappointed by the Helvari. There was no satisfaction in a surrender that fast. He expected humans to be similar. His analysts had briefed him thoroughly. A young species, barely 2 centuries of spacefaring capability, primitive compared to the Catherine's 12,000 years of expansion. The human homeworld was soft and warm and far away, and the colony below him was essentially undefended. He was expecting 40 minutes. He was already composing the victory report in his head. He was wrong in every way that would later define what historians called the Vega Reckoning. And he was about to find out exactly how wrong. The Vega Prime Defense Force scrambled 37 fighter against 300 warships. 37. The pilots who climbed into those cockpits in the 11 seconds of warning they had. Those pilots knew the arithmetic. They knew they were not a military force. They were a statement. They launched anyway, punching through Vega Prime's upper atmosphere in staggered formations, their fighter trails burning white against the artificial dark of the Catherine Formation above. Commander Elena Vasquez led them. She was 43 years old, a decorated veteran of 3 border conflicts along humanity's frontier, and she had a daughter back on Earth named Priya, who had just turned 7. She thought about Priya in the first seconds of the climb, not as sentiment, but as clarity. She knew what this flight was. She had known for 6 months what it was going to be. She had made her peace with it, in a room where peace was the only thing she had to offer. She keyed her radio. Her voice was flat and surgical. Vega Prime Defense Force. For the record, I want it noted that not a single person in this squadron was ordered to do this. We're here because we chose to be. Let's make sure they remember we were here at all. 36 acknowledgements came back. Some were steady as stone. Some were trembling. All of them accelerated toward the Catherine fleet. The aliens opened fire. 22 fighters died in the first volley. They didn't burn, didn't explode in the dramatic way of movie spaceship battles. They simply ceased to exist, reduced to their component atoms in a fraction of a second, by directed energy weapons that operated at temperatures science hadn't adequately named. One moment those pilots were there, the next they were light. Elena didn't flinch. She rolled her fighter 90 degrees, dove under the leading edge of the Catherine Formation, and released her entire payload of magnetic cluster mines against the hull of the nearest warship, a vessel the size of a city block. Its hull plating etched with alien markings that glowed faintly blue. The detonations registered on the hull like rain on a battleship. Nothing. She pulled up hard, breathed through her nose, keyed the colony-wide emergency channel with complete stillness in her voice. Commander Vasquez to all Vega Prime networks, execute Protocol 7 right now. Do not wait for any further authorization. Then she flipped her fighter 180 degrees, pointed it directly at Voxar's flagship, and pushed the throttle to maximum. She got close enough to see the flagship's hull plating, each panel the size of a football field, warm with inner light before the defensive screen struck her fighter, and compressed it into something approximately the size of a fist. The battle lasted 11 minutes and 17 seconds. When it was over, the Ketheran owned the sky. Voxar issued his standard planetary broadcast, the surrender template, translated by his communication AI into 73 human languages. A 72-hour deadline, report to designated collection points, submit all technology and weapons, formally acknowledge the supremacy of the Ketheran Empire. He sat back and waited for the weeping. What came back was not weeping. What came back was a single audio file, 11 seconds long, transmitted from a communication relay buried 3 kilometers underground on a frequency so specific that Voxar's AI almost missed it entirely. It contained no images, no text, just a voice. Elena Vasquez's voice. She had recorded it in the 14 seconds between transmitting Protocol 7 and turning her fighter toward the flagship. 14 seconds. She had known exactly what to say because she had planned it 6 months in advance. There were no threats in it, no defiance, no declarations of war or promises of vengeance. Nothing the Ketheran communication AI could parse as military content. Just 4 words in English, followed by a string of spatial coordinates. Marcus, it's done. Go. Voxar had the message analyzed for 7 hours. His cryptographers found no hidden encoding, no secondary signal, no weapons data. What none of them understood, what they couldn't possibly understand, was that those 4 words were not a message to a person. They were the activation command for the most complex military operation in human history. 25 light-years away on a planet called Earth, General Marcus Holt stood in a room beneath the Pentagon and read the transcript. He was quiet for a long moment. The room around him held 41 officers, all of them watching him. He looked at the 4 words one more time. Then he set the transcript down. He turned to face the room. He said 7 words. Initiate Operation Deep Water. All phases now, and humanity, which had been waiting with extraordinary patience for exactly this moment, began to move. The Ketheran Empire had conquered 41 worlds, and never once encountered a species that had been expecting them. They were about to find out what that felt like. 6 months before the first Ketheran ship crossed into human-explored space, an artificial intelligence called ARIS, Autonomous Reconnaissance and Extraterrestrial Surveillance, had intercepted a Ketheran military communication burst near the Vega system. ARS had been operating in deep space for 11 years under the cover designation Deep Space Geological Survey Probe Network. Its actual function was the most classified program Earth had ever run, building a complete intelligence picture of every alien civilization within 500 light-years, with specific attention to any that showed signs of expansionist military doctrine. It took Ares 16 hours to crack the Ketheran communications encryption, 12 more to confirm what it found inside a target list. Humanity's name was third on it. Below 2 species the Ketheran had already moved against above 38 more. The list included estimated conquest timelines, planetary resource assessments, and a single military classification code that Ares cross-referenced against 4 years of accumulated Ketheran intelligence. The code translated imperfectly as prey. Ares delivered the information to exactly 4 people: the President of the United States, the UN Secretary-General, General Marcus Holt, and a xenobiological weapons researcher named Dr. Sarah Okafor, who was at the time, by a comfortable margin, the world's foremost expert on alien warfare doctrine. She had spent 15 years studying theoretical alien combat psychology and had published under classified clearance a paper titled "Why Every Spacefaring Predator Species Makes the Same 6 Mistakes." Hull read that paper once. Then he called Okafor directly and said, "Tell me how to make them make all 6. They had 6 months. Most civilizations receiving intelligence that a conquering empire was coming for them would attempt diplomacy, would broadcast messages of peace and cultural exchange, would hope that rationality would prevail." Holt understood, with the cold clarity of a man who had spent 30 years in military planning, that the Kiran Communication Archive, ARIS had compiled, gave no evidence that the Empire was capable of recognizing anything as an equal. They had 17 words in their language for slave. They had 0 words for peer. He did not attempt diplomacy. What he did instead was execute a plan that had, in its foundational structure, existed for 20 years under the code name Operation Deep Water. A contingency plan developed quietly by a succession of military planners who had all believed in the statistical inevitability of hostile alien contact, and had all been told by successive administrations that public knowledge of such planning would cause mass panic. The plan had three components which Hall now activated in parallel. The first was Vega Prime. Over 5 months, Hall moved 100,000 specially selected soldiers to Vega Prime, under the cover of colonial expansion support personnel. He built using automated drilling systems operating under complete sensor blackout, a tunnel network beneath the colony's 3 major cities. Each tunnel lined with a material called phase carbon, which Okafor had developed from theoretical xenobiological research into alien scanning frequencies. Phase carbon absorbed every scanning technology the Catharan were known to use. To any sensor pointed at the ground from outside, the tunnels didn't exist. The soldiers inside them didn't exist. He also quietly arranged for the evacuation of all non-essential civilians from Vega Prime over 5 months, disguised as normal population movement, spread across so many individual decisions that no journalist connected the dots. The colony's headcount dropped by 1.4 million people without a single news alert triggering. The second component was the tracker program. 20,000 colonists who remained on Vega Prime were during a routine medical visit that described itself as a flu vaccination, injected with microscopic passive tracking beacons. The beacons were Aquafor's design, completely dormant, undetectable by any known scanning method, and activated only by a specific quantum frequency trigger embedded in a carrier wave. The beacons were skin-dade, designed to be shed naturally within 90 days, long enough to do their job. Elena Vasquez's final transmission carried that trigger in its audio waveform. The moment the message transmitted, every Catharan ship that had drifted within 2 kilometers of a human refugee transport over the previous 72 hours was tagged. Their positions painted in real time on Ares's tactical display with precision down to 3 meters. Flagship supply carriers, troop transports, weapons vessels, perfect targets, every one of them. The third component was the Black Fleet. Project Deepwater had been building it for 31 years. It existed in classified budget documentation as Deep Space Geological Survey Operations Equipment Maintenance. It had consumed more combined funding than the entire U.S. defense budget for a cumulative 12 years of that period. Hidden behind 22 layers of international shell organizations and government black budgets, it employed 40,000 people who had signed agreements so restrictive that their own families believed they worked in mining operations on asteroids. 800 warships. Not the ceremonial vessels that appeared at public defense events. Not the patrol frigates and orbital platforms that featured in every government press release about humanity's spacefaring capability. The Black Fleet had been designed, iterated, and rebuilt 4 times over 30 years with one mission: destroy the most capable hostile military force humanity's intelligence could envision. The Keth Aaron were capable, extraordinarily so. The Black Fleet had been designed for something worse and recalibrated down to match. Admiral Zara Chen commanded it from the bridge of the ISS Rubicon, the fleet flagship, currently positioned in the precise shadow of Vega Prime's second moon, at coordinates calculated to keep it invisible to Kieran's sensor arrays. Chen was 61 years old, built like someone who had never once in her life allowed posture to communicate submission, and she had been waiting for this specific moment for 11 years. Since the day Holt had personally briefed her on Operation Deepwater and asked if she wanted command of the Black Fleet, she had said yes before he finished the sentence. She watched the Catharan fleet on her sensor display. 300 ships, she counted them the way a surgeon counts instruments. Fleet telemetry from phase carbon relay, she asked. Perfect resolution, Admiral. Every Catharan vessel tagged and tracked. Tracker confirmation. All 300 vessels tagged via refugee deployment. Vasquez's transmission activated the entire network simultaneously. Chen was quiet for a moment. She had a photograph inside her command console's panel. Elena Vasquez in dress uniform 8 years ago at the ceremony where they'd both received their Deepwater briefings. Not a memorial, a promise. Time to Holt's authorization signal. 14 hours. She looked at Vega Prime below, blue, green, peaceful from orbit. Somewhere beneath that surface, 100,000 human soldiers were sitting in the dark in tunnels that didn't exist on any Catharan scanner, maintaining the absolute stillness of people who understood exactly what they were waiting for. 14 hours, Jen said. Then we introduce ourselves. Voxar was developing an emotion he did not have a word for. He had a word for fear. The Catharan language had 11 varieties of it, from the fear of physical pain, to the existential fear of the void. He had a word for unease, for suspicion, for the specific anxiety of a military commander who has read an enemy's positioning wrong. But what he was experiencing now, standing in the command center of his flagship on the 14th hour of the occupation of Vega Prime, was none of those things precisely. It was more like the sensation of reaching for a door handle and finding it already open. The humans had vanished, not fled, vanished. His ground forces had swept every building in all 3 major colony cities with exhaustive, systematic precision. Every room, every basement, every crawl space, every structure on the planet large enough to conceal a living organism. They had found personal effects, furniture, children's toys, half-finished books, calendar appointments for dates 3 weeks in the future. In one apartment in the colony's northern city, a pot of coffee was still faintly warm on a kitchen counter. Not a single human anywhere. His science commander, Kiev, had run full-spectrum planetary sweeps, covering every scanning frequency the Catherine military possessed. Thermal, gravimetric, quantum state detection, electromagnetic. The sweeps returned. Nothing biological, nothing moving, nothing breathing. The planet registered as inhabited only by its plant life and small fauna. They evacuated before we arrived. Caft concluded significant pre-warning of our approach. They fled the system. Voxar accepted this. It was logical. 41 previous conquests had taught him that sentient species with functioning intelligence chose survival over territory when given time to choose. The humans had clearly had some warning, enough to evacuate 2 million colonists, which was itself an impressive logistical achievement. He would note it in his report as evidence of above-average organizational capability. It would not change the outcome. He ordered his 80,000 soldier occupation force to disperse across the colony and begin standard resource extraction. Vega Prime's tritonium ore deposits were extraordinarily rich, enough to fuel a full Catherine expansion fleet for 6 years. The planet was worth having, even empty of its original inhabitants. He did not think about why the coffee was still warm. He should have. 4 kilometers below the surface of the colony's largest city, Sergeant First Class Diego Torres was doing push-ups. He was on his 3 Theta 1 12th when his earpiece crackled. Torres, Catherine ground forces confirmed at 80,000. Dispersal to all 3 sectors complete. They're setting up resource extraction infrastructure. Torres stood up. He was a dense, barrel-chested man, with the kind of face that had been rebuilt from components after several explosive events in his career. 22 years of special operations across 4 continents and 2 moons. He had exactly 1 emotional register in a combat situation. The quiet, complete focus of a man who had spent a lifetime eliminating noise from his thinking. He looked down the tunnel. 2,000 soldiers visible from here, in blue phase carbon light, checking weapons and equipment for the 100th time. He knew without looking that 98,000 more were in identical tunnels across the network doing exactly the same thing. They set up extraction equipment, he said. Affirmative. They believe the colony is empty. Torres permitted himself a smile. It was brief. Good. Let them get comfortable. The phase carbon network beneath Vega Prime was without question the greatest feat of secret construction in human history. 18 months of automated drilling under absolute sensor blackout, completed in layers so that no single construction phase gave away the final design. The phase carbon lining was Okafor's invention, a crystalline carbon compound that absorbed every known Catherine scanning frequency with perfect efficiency, reflecting none of them, emitting none of its own. To any sensor array pointing at the ground, the tunnels were rock. The 100,000 soldiers inside them were rock. They had been underground for 93 days. They had not been bored. Torres had made sure of that. Each soldier had been selected personally, drawn from the most elite special operations units across the U.S. military and 7 allied nations, all of them volunteers, who had been told the exact nature of the mission before they agreed. Go to Vega Prime. Go underground. An alien fleet will occupy the planet above you. You will wait in the dark for as long as it takes. When the signal comes, you will rise from the ground inside their perimeter, and you will fight through it. No guaranteed extraction, no guaranteed timeline, no guaranteed anything, except one absolute certainty. You will be humanity's first real strike. Every one of them had said yes. They were equipped with weapons Okafor had spent years designing specifically for Karen physiology. Not just enhanced ordnance and armor-piercing rounds, but resonance frequency disruptors. The Catherine communicated and coordinated through bioluminescent nodes in their neural tissue, a biological radio network that allowed instantaneous communication between individual soldiers and their command structure. The disruptors emitted a precisely calibrated frequency that interfered with those nodes without physically harming the Catharan soldier. The effect was immediate and total complete communication blackout. A Catherine hit by a disruptor was physically intact, but operationally alone, cut off from command, from teammates, from any of the worked coordination that made Catharan military units so devastatingly effective. In isolation, a Catharan soldier was still formidable. Against a human soldier who had been training for exactly this engagement for 93 days, they were manageable. Torres had 50 strike teams, 2,000 soldiers each. Every team had a specific assigned Catharan position mapped in real time from surface sensors the aliens couldn't detect, updating constantly, giving Taurus's commanders a live picture of every enemy unit above them. Taurus. It was Okafor's voice from the analysis bay 4 tunnels east. She always sounded the same when she found something important, completely level, slightly breathless, like her body was running a lap behind her brain. You need to hear this talk. I cracked the Catharan command channel upgrade they switched to 48 hours ago. I've been reading their operational orders since this morning. And they're not here for conquest, not primarily. They're here for the Tritonium. 60 days of extraction. Then they leave a garrison of 10,000 and move the main fleet. Move it where? A pause. Brief, heavy. Earth. Torres was still for exactly 4 seconds. Then he opened his all-command channel, the one that reached every one of the 100,000 soldiers waiting in the dark beneath Vega Prime. He said 8 words. We are not letting a single one of them leave. Above him, 80,000 Keithan soldiers went about their occupation with the ease of a civilization that had done this 41 times. They built processing facilities over the Tritonium deposits. They established patrol corridors through the empty city streets. They flew dropships between sectors in perfect formation, scanning a planet they believed was abandoned, completely unaware that beneath their feet, less than 5 kilometers down, 100,000 human soldiers had just sharpened their teeth on their timetable. In the shadow of Vega Prime's moon, Admiral Chen received Torres's encrypted burst, recalibrated the Black Fleet's attack sequence by 31 minutes, and said nothing. She was not a woman who narrated her own intentions. She was a woman who executed them. All that remained was the signal. The signal came in the form of a single word. It was buried so deeply in a standard telemetry carrier wave that even ARS flagged it as barely intentional. It was transmitted simultaneously on 47 different frequencies in 11 different encoding formats, appearing on each one as no more than background noise to any system not specifically calibrated to read it. The word was Vega. Elena Vasquez had chosen it herself. Chen read it on her command display at O2 Wars hours. She read it once. She straightened. She put her hands behind her back. All ships, weapons free. Execute Operation Blood Tide. 800 Black Fleet warships came out of the dark. They came together, not staggered, not in sequence, but simultaneously emerging from the moon's shadow in a wall of acceleration that lit the local space behind them like a second dawn. Any Catharan sensor looking in the right direction would have had exactly 3 seconds of warning before the Black Fleet's first weapons fired. 3 seconds. The Catherine did not use them well. ISS Rubicon led the assault column, its primary rail cannon battery firing a synchronized spread of kinetic penetrators at fractional light velocity, fast enough to defeat Catherine's shield reconfiguration algorithms, which ARS had mapped in painstaking detail over 4 years of covert signal interception. Each penetrator carried a quantum cascade disruptor payload. The disruptors didn't destroy on impact, they infected, cascading through the target vessel's energy distribution network, turning every system sluggish and reactive, as if the ship was suddenly operating through molasses. 300 Catherine warships turned to face 800 Black Fleet vessels. The Catherine were extraordinary warriors. Their technology was advanced. Their commanders were veterans of 4 decades of conquest across 4 dozen worlds. Under any normal circumstances, the numbers weren't as one-sided as they looked, but they had never fought Ares. The AI managed all 800 Black Fleet vessels simultaneously, processing targeting solutions for every ship in the engagement in real time, coordinating firing spreads across the fleet with microcond precision, adapting to Catharan countermeasures faster than the enemy commanders could verbalize new orders. When Catharan ships repositioned to open firing angles, Ares had already distributed counter-positioning orders across 40 Black Fleet vessels before the repositioning completed. When Kethan commanders attempted coordinated attack runs, Ares was dismantling the coordination before it could execute. For the first time in 4 decades of expansion, the Catharan were fighting something that thought faster than they did. On the surface of Vega Prime, exactly 60 seconds after Chen's activation signal, 50-phase carbon tunnel hatches opened. They opened across all 3 colony cities simultaneously, in building basement under city squares beneath infrastructure facilities, in locations that placed each emerging strike team inside the Catharan patrol corridors rather than outside them. Torres had designed the emergence points not for dramatic effect, but for immediate tactical dominance. Every team would be within firing range of at least 3 Catharan positions the moment they surfaced. 100,000 soldiers came up out of the ground in 4 minutes and 11 seconds. The Catharan on the surface had no framework for what was happening. Their sensors had shown an empty planet for 14 days. Their patrol patterns were focused outward. When the ground opened beneath them, and human soldiers erupted in organized columns from positions that didn't exist on any Catharan map, the occupation force had exactly 1 second of alert before the first resonance frequency disruptors fired. After that, they were alone. The ground battle was not a battle in any conventional sense. It was a deconstruction. Torres's teams moved through the Catharan positions with the efficiency of people who had been rehearsing this exact operation against accurate simulations for 93 days. They knew where every Catharan unit was, because Eris had been feeding real-time positioning data to Torres's command display for 2 weeks. They knew how every Catharan unit would react to disruptor fire, because Okafor had studied and published under classification a 300-page analysis of Catharan unit psychology under communication blackout. In 64 minutes, the occupation force of 80,000 had been reduced to 12,000. The remainder dead, incapacitated, or so thoroughly disrupted that organized resistance was functionally impossible. And then Voxar made his decision. He watched the rout of his occupation force on his command display, with the expression of a creature encountering something genuinely unprecedented. He had lost occupation forces before. In 3 of his 41 conquests, local resistance had inflicted significant casualties before being suppressed. He had never seen 80,000 soldiers dismantled in 64 minutes by an enemy that hadn't existed on his sensors 24 hours ago. He processed this case. He considered his options. Then he transmitted an order to the weapons vessel Cathvar, currently holding high orbit. Activate the Extinction Pulse. The Extinction Pulse was the Catharan Empire's most classified weapon system. It had been used exactly twice in 12,000 years of expansion, both times to resolve occupation scenarios that had deteriorated beyond conventional military solution. It worked by generating a precise wavelength of targeted radiation that interrupted biological cellular processes in any organism within its field of effect. Critically, it was tunable, capable of targeting a specific biological profile while leaving other biologies largely unaffected. Kath, the Catharan weapons scientist commanding the Cathvar, paused before executing. Supreme Warlord, our ground forces are still in the field. The pulse they are already lost. Activate it. Kaft was not a traitor. She was a soldier. She programmed the Extinction Pulse to target human biological signatures, set the radius to encompass the entire surface of Vega Prime, and initiated the charging sequence. Full charge 7 minutes. In a laboratory on the surface of Vega Prime inside the colony's university building, Dr. Sarah Okafor had been monitoring the Catharan command channel since the moment the battle began. She detected the Extinction Pulse's charging sequence 4 minutes before KTH finished the programming sequence. She recognized it from the specific power draw signature that Ars had cataloged 3 years ago from a Catharan military archive, a signature she had flagged personally and spent 6 weeks analyzing because she had built a contingency around exactly this possibility. She had 3 minutes and 40 seconds. She opened a channel to Torres. Get everyone underground, all forces, right now. You have 3 minutes 20 seconds. Move. Torres had rehearsed this evacuation 73 times. He transmitted the withdrawal order in the same breath. 100,000 soldiers were below phase carbon cover in 92 seconds. Okafor did not go underground. She was standing in the university laboratory, surrounded by captured Catharan communications equipment. She had spent 3 months learning to operate, and she was not emphatically with complete deliberate intent going to stop the extinction pulse. She was going to take it. The thing about the extinction pulse that the Catharan had never adequately engineered around, the thing that Cavetithich would later in her account of the battle identify as the fundamental architectural flaw in the weapon's design, was that it required a coherent resonance frequency to function as designed. Remove the coherence, scatter the frequency, and the pulse became noise. Redirect that noise with a precise frequency shift, and it became something else entirely. Okafor had spent 3 months studying phase carbon. In those 3 months, between everything else she was doing, she had discovered a property of the material that wasn't in the original research documentation because it had never been relevant to its original application. At specific angles and densities, phase carbon didn't just absorb incoming frequencies. It reflected them with a precise crystalline frequency shift determined by the material's microstructure. She had 47 phase carbon panels positioned around the exterior of the university building. She had placed them herself over 3 nights, calculating the geometric arrangement through 17 hours of computational modeling that Ares had run at her request. She had not told Torres, she had not told Chin, she had not told anyone, because she had known that if she explained what she was planning, someone would tell her it was too dangerous to attempt. She had 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Ares, she said, Percapicosuz, confirm panel alignment. Alignment confirmed. Reflection geometry accurate to 0.003 degrees. Dr. Okafor, I know you are not underground. I know that too. Personal exposure through reflection geometry will be approximately 37% of lethal dose for human tissue at current calculated pulse intensity. That is not 0, she agreed. Record everything. If I'm wrong about the math, I want the record to show exactly where the error was. Recording initiated. For what it's worth, the math is correct. Then I just have to be fast enough. She sat down at the Catharan communications interface and began the modification sequence. What she was doing required the kind of focus that left no room for fear. Using the Catharan weapon's own communication handshake protocol to access the Kevar's firing parameters through the orbital command relay not to stop the pulse. She didn't have time to stop it, and the system wouldn't permit remote termination anyway. She was accessing a single variable in the emitter's return path amplification matrix, the component that governed what the pulse did after its initial projection. She was giving it an echo. The extinction pulse fired at 7 minutes exactly. It struck Vega Prime's surface in a single propagating wave of invisible radiation sweeping across every continent in 12 seconds. Every living thing on the surface that was exposed to its full waveform died. Kier and ground soldiers, small mammals, complex plant life gone instantly, painlessly, completely. And then the reflected wave from Okafor's phase carbon panels propagated upward. It was not the full pulse. Perhaps 30% of the original energy refracted and redirected. But Okafor had done more than just redirect it. She had shifted its frequency, matching it with extraordinary precision to the biological signature of Keither, and life instead of human. She had taken their weapon and turned it inside out. The reflected wave hit the Keitharan vessels in low orbital position, the ships that had moved closest to the planet during the battle to provide cover for the occupation forces. Crew members in unshielded compartments experienced the same fate as the ground troops below, ships without active biological shielding, and none of them had it because the strategic doctrine for the extinction pulse had never accounted for the possibility of return fire. Because return fire from the ground against a weapon fired from space was not a concept that existed in Catharan military theory. Lost significant crew in an instant. 43 Catharan vessels in low orbit went dark within seconds of the reflected wave. 37 more lost over half their crew complement and fell into uncontrolled drift. In the space above Vega Prime, the lower half of the Catharan formation simply collapsed. Ships going dark, spinning, colliding with each other in the chaos of mass crew incapacitation. On the Rubicon's bridge, Chen watched her sensor display reconfigure in real time as the Cathar formation fell apart. She did not immediately understand what had happened. She understood it the way a tactician understands unexpected gift, completely, instantly, and without wasting time on amazement. All Black Fleet vessels. Target the disabled ships. Priority. Disable and board. I want them intact. The Black Fleet swept through the shattered Catharan formation. Ares coordinated boarding operations across 190 vessels simultaneously, routing assault teams through Catharan Hall schematics it had compiled from years of covert intelligence. The Catharan, who still had functioning crews, fought with ferocity. They were met with humans who had been building toward this exact engagement for 30 years. Below, Torres brought his forces back to the surface. He walked through the ruins of what had been New Denver. The extinction pulse had done its work on the surface. The Catharan ground forces were gone, and the city's surface level was scoured clean. But the buildings still stood. The infrastructure was intact. The underground was untouched. Vega Prime had survived. He keyed his radio. Oka 4 status, silence. 20 seconds of it. Then I'm in the university. West Wing Floor 2. I think I was about a second and a half slower than the math assumed. Torres ran. He found her on the floor of the laboratory, surrounded by glowing Catharan equipment, her back against the wall, breathing carefully in the way of someone whose body was processing something it wasn't designed to process. Not unconscious, not broken, but slow in a way he had never seen her before. She was alive. "You absolute lunatic," Torres said, dropping to one knee beside her. "The math was right," she said. "I just moved at human speed instead of calculation speed. You didn't tell anyone you were staying up here. If I had, you'd have argued with me, and I'd have run out of time." A pause. "Did it work?" Torres looked at his command display. 300 Catharan ships, over 200 disabled, destroyed or boarded. Voxar's flagship in high orbit, shielded, untouched. Alone in space with 600 Black Fleet vessels around it. "Yes," he said. "It worked." She closed her eyes, let out a slow breath. "Good. Then I was right about the geometry." "A moment. There's something else in the captured Catharan systems, Taurus. Something in the data I pulled before the pulse fired. I need 20 minutes before you put me in a medical bay. What could be more important right now than getting you medical attention?" She opened her eyes. "Winning the next 41 wars before they start," she said. They brought Voxar aboard the Rubicon in restraints. It had taken 6 hours, 3 boarding teams, and the complete severing of the flagship's power systems to extract him. He had not surrendered. He would not surrender. His crew had fought to the last able-bodied member. Voxar himself had sealed in the command core with 6 personal guards and a backup power system, and he had not responded to a single communication in those 6 hours. They had cut the door off its hinges. He stood in the Rubicon's secure holding bay, an immense creature 2 meters tall. His exoskeletal battle armor cracked in 4 places, his bioluminescent communication nodes dark, and still in a way that on a Catharan indicated something very close to shock. He looked at the humans assembled before him with the deliberate assessment of a commander running damage calculations, not yet surrendering, but counting. Admiral Chen stood in front of him, a full meter shorter. She looked at him the way she looked at everything. "With the absence of theater, I'm going to offer you the same terms you offered Vega Prime," she said. "Surrender your fleet's technical schematics, formally acknowledge the military capability of the human species, and transmit a message to your empire describing what happened here." Voxar's translator module rendered this into Catharan. He was still for a long moment. "You have destroyed a fleet," he finally said. The translator gave his voice a low, deliberate resonance. "The Empire has 400 more, each of them larger than what you faced here. They will come. They will bring weapons you have not encountered. They will not make the errors I made." "Possibly," Chen said. "Then you understand this is not a victory. It is a delay. A generation at most. Then the Empire comes for your entire species with the full weight of 12,000 years of military development." "That would be a serious problem," Chen agreed, "if we were planning to wait for them to come to us." Something shifted in Voxar's expression. The intelligence of a creature who had survived 4 decades of warfare saw something in her certainty that didn't match the scenario he was analyzing. "What have you done?" In the Rubicon Scientific Analysis Bay, Dr. Sarah Okafor, wrapped in a thermal blanket, her arm in a temporary medical sleeve, running on stimulants and the specific determination of a person who has already decided to finish something, made her final entry in a transmission package she had been building for 38 hours. She had found it in the Catharan systems data she'd pulled from captured vessels before the extinction pulse fired. Not weapon specifications, though those were there. Not tactical protocols, though she had those too. She had found the Catharan Empire's internal communication network architecture. Specifically, the quantum frequency relay channels the Empire used to govern every occupied system, every administrative relay, every garrison command node, every communication hub, linking the Catharan Central Command to 41 conquered worlds, 41 civilizations, each of them sitting in silence under Kiran occupation, each of them, by Catharan doctrine, kept deliberately isolated from each other. No interworld communication, no shared information, no knowledge of how large or small or strong or vulnerable the Empire actually was. That isolation was the cornerstone of Catharan occupation strategy. Keep every subject species believing they were alone. That resistance was local, and therefore futile. That the Empire was infinite, and therefore immovable. Okapor's transmission package contained 4 items. The first was the counter-pulse weapon schematics. The full technical specifications for what she had done with the extinction pulse, reverse-engineered and documented so that any species with basic manufacturing capability could build a standalone version within 30 days using locally available materials. The second was phase carbon construction specifications, the full material science documentation, production methodology, and applications guide. The third was a tactical doctrine file, AIS's complete analysis of Catharan military vulnerabilities. Written in the simplified format, Okapor had spent 2 nights translating into a form transmissible in the electromagnetic protocols each of the 41 species could receive. The fourth was a document Okapor had written herself. She had not cleared it with Hole, had not cleared it with Chen, had not cleared it with anyone, because she understood with complete clarity that if she had asked for authorization, she would not have received it. The diplomatic implications were too enormous, the legal authority too murky, the potential for catastrophic unintended consequence too visible to anyone who wasn't inside her head, understanding exactly why it was necessary. The document was titled, What We Did at Vega Prime, and How You Can Do It Too. It was 11 pages, concise, specific, useful. She transmitted the full package on 41 separate quantum frequency channels simultaneously, using the Catharan Empire's own relay network as the delivery system. It took 19 seconds to send. In the holding bay, Voxar felt it before he understood it. His communication nodes, dark since the boarding action, functioning only partially, flickered once, twice. He was receiving something on the Empire's network, not a signal meant for him. A broad-spectrum transmission propagating outward through the relay architecture of the entire Empire, carried by every node and satellite in a network designed to be unjammable from outside, because it had been designed to prevent the Empire's enemies from interfering with internal communications. It had never been designed to prevent an internal broadcast. He watched the ripple move through his own network, felt it carry outward across light years toward 41 occupied worlds, and understood in that moment, with the slow, absolute horror of a being watching the foundation of everything it had built begin to crack, exactly what had happened. "What did you do?" he said. Chen received the notification the same moment. She read it twice. She was quiet for 4 seconds. "It appears," she said carefully, "that Dr. Okapor has been making her own strategic decisions. The first rebellion began on Heskari, home of the Valen, a species the Catharan had occupied for 87 years, 16 hours after Okafor's transmission reached them. The Valen had been considered by Kethar and behavioral science one of the most thoroughly pacified species in the Empire. They had not resisted in 40 years. They had no weapons. They had, as far as the Catharan garrison understood, no will to fight. What the garrison didn't know, what the isolation doctrine had prevented them from knowing, was that the Valen had been waiting, not passively, actively, for 87 years in silence, maintaining their patience with a cultural discipline that the Cathar had never had reason to study. They had kept their engineers, kept their scientists, kept their institutional knowledge passed generation to generation in a form of oral technical tradition that the Cathar had observed as a cultural practice and never examined as a threat. When Okafor's transmission arrived with weapon schematics they could build in 30 days from materials the Catharan were storing on Heskari for their own extraction operations, the Valen took 26 hours to decide. Then they started building. The Heskari garrison fell in 9 days. 12 other occupied worlds rose within the first month, 8 more within the second. The Catharan Empire, which had spent 12,000 years building an occupation doctrine based on the premise that isolated unarmed subject species could not coordinate resistance, encountered something its doctrine contained no response to. 41 species that were no longer isolated, no longer unarmed, and no longer willing to wait. General Holt arrived at Vega Prime 6 weeks after the battle. He walked through New Denver, still raw, still rebuilding, construction equipment running across the scorched surface through every daylight hour. He looked at the planet's recovery the way he looked at everything as a tactical situation, with a known solution and an estimated timeline. He found Priya Vasquez in the colony's rebuilt command center. She was 23 years old, a signals officer. She had her mother's eyes, and her mother's specific quality of stillness, the kind that wasn't passivity, but precision. Every expression chosen rather than automatic. She had requested assignment to the Vega Prime Reconstruction Garrison the week the planet was declared secure, and no one had felt it was their place to refuse her. She was standing at a viewport looking out at the planet. Holt stood beside her. The silence between them was comfortable in the way of people who were thinking the same thing. She knew, didn't she? Priya said, not looking away from the planet. What she was starting. She knew what Protocol 7 would activate, what the trackers would do, what the Black Fleet would find, what Okafor would figure out. She knew all of it. Holt thought about the message. Marcus, it's done. Go. 4 words carrying a complete architecture of consequence in the negative space between them. Elena had understood in the 14 seconds she had that the plan was larger than her survival, that the plan required her to buy time she could only buy one way, and that she had been building toward this sacrifice since the day they'd sat in a classified room and designed the activation sequence together. She had known she had flown at the flagship anyway, because someone had to. She knew exactly what she was starting, Holt said. Outside the viewport, Vega Prime turned slowly in the light of its star. The extinction pulse had left long swaths of scorched surface across the northern continent, still bare, still raw, looking from orbit like wounds on the landscape. But between the scorch marks, the colony's irrigation systems had come back online. The fields were being planted again. Life was pressing upward through the edges of the devastation, the way it always had, the way it always would. In the Kitharan Empire, 12,000 years of uncontested expansion were ending. Not because humanity had built a bigger fleet, or developed more advanced weapons, or found some technological edge that made the contest unequal. The Empire was ending because of something simpler and more total. The revelation that it was not infinite, that the Catherine could bleed, that their weapons could be turned, that 41 species sitting in darkness, sitting in the same fundamental human condition of an occupied people, waiting for a reason to rise, had been given that reason, in 19 seconds, by a woman in a thermal blanket on a damaged warship, and had risen without hesitation. Humanity had not won a battle. It had started a fire that the Kethan Empire, despite 400 fleets and 12,000 years of practice, had no doctrine for extinguishing, because the fire was not humanity. The fire was the knowledge that resistance was possible, and knowledge once transmitted cannot be recalled. Vega Prime would be green again in 6 years. The first children born there after the occupation would grow up knowing only a free world under an open sky, and in the galaxy beyond, 41 civilizations would spend the next century rebuilding themselves around a single transmitted document and the name of the woman who sent it. Elena Vasquez had 11 seconds. She used them